Good afternoon and welcome to the very first hrQ Virtual Fireside Chat. I'm your host, Sal Vergara, Vice President and Managing Director for hrQ here in Dallas. Joining me today is our Chief Revenue Officer, Mr. Brett Kierstead. Many of our attendees today are clients, but for those of you that aren't familiar with us, our parent company, Landrum HR, is a nationwide human capital services organization. We offer full-service HR outsourcing or PEO services, worksite management and staffing solutions, and insurance. The hrQ division conducts searches for top interim and full-time HR professional placements, ranging anywhere from recruiters all the way to CHROs. And we offer comprehensive HR consulting with our deep expertise in talent management and strategy, HR transformation, organizational design, workforce planning analytics, and HR on call. So these last few months, I've been hosting ideal roundtables that have provided chief diversity and inclusion officers across the United States to advance the dialogue revolving around inclusion, diversity, equity, and authentic leadership. And that acronym is IDEAL. And I've anonymized and consolidated their comments and their feedback, and we'll be creating an executive summary to highlight those best practices. Now, the companies that have been gracious enough to share those best practices with me include the NBA, Nike, Walmart, Siemens USA, Wayfair, PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, 7-Eleven, the Bill and Melinda Gates Medical Research Institute, JP Morgan Chase, DFW International Airport, the NFL Alumni, First United Bank, Fix Software out of Canada, and Benny Keith. So thanks to all of them for their expertise, their time, and their contributions. So now I wanted to continue that dialogue in a more conversational format, hence this virtual fireside chat. With me today, I'm very happy to have a friend of mine who happened to be a panelist on my last roundtable. I'm honored to have Nichelle Grant, Head of Diversity and Equity at Siemens USA. As many of you know, Siemens is a global technology mainstay that has set the benchmark for engineering excellence, innovation, quality, and reliability for over 170 years. They boast over 295,000 global employees, of which 50,000 reside in the U.S. Nichelle's initiatives include developing go-to market strategies, focusing on the customer experience and driving operational excellence. She's been involved with diversity and inclusion at Siemens for over a decade now, including voluntarily leading its employee resource groups and diversity councils, which, by the way, both those groups have been even more critical across different companies over the past few months. She's recently played an integral role in working with supply chain and procurement teams to increase supplier diversity efforts, and she represents her company before many customers for whom this is core to doing business with Siemens. So as you can see, she's not a very busy lady. So without further delay, how are you, Nichelle? Good afternoon to you.
Hear me?
Yeah, I can. Happy International Human Rights Day, by the way. How apropos for us to have this conversation.
Yes, we're celebrating that too. It's very important for human rights.
Absolutely. The irony, before we start, we talked about this before we came on air. It's going to be 77, 80 degrees out here in Dallas, so it seems ironic to have a virtual fireside chat. We should have called this the virtual patio chat, but nonetheless, we'll move on. For those tuning in, for those of you that have exactly, for those who tune in, any questions or comments that you guys have, please send those in to us via the questions panel, and our esteemed moderator, Brett, will farm those out to us. So please ask those questions. There is a quick poll that'll be showing up on your screen. If you can give us an idea as to where you are as it relates to your ID&E strategy, that would be great. So as we're tallying those responses, Nichelle, where was Siemens in relation to their ID&E strategy when you assumed the role?
Well, let me say first, thanks, Sal. Thanks, Brett, for having me. Looking forward to our discussion. When I think about our D&I strategy over the years, man, I remember our strategy was first one ERG. It was the women's ERG. We started it, 10 plus years ago, and it has grown from one ERG to now we have 9 ERGs within our realm. And when we take a look at our strategy overall, it evolved over time. We didn't try to do everything that we're doing today at one time. And so when I think about strategically going from one ERG to several ERGs to diversity councils to connecting to the business strategies. Currently, we're working within a 3-pillar strategy: the workforce, the people, the workplace, the culture and climate, and the marketplace, our customers, partnerships, and suppliers.
One of the key words that you mentioned is evolution. And from the panels that I've had, from the roundtables, I think there were a few common denominators, even on the panel that you were sitting on. Companies were very advanced, at least the ones that were on the panel, very intentional of what they did. Lots of custom-centric platforms like town halls, open forums, and very heavy usage of data. There were a few companies that were far advanced and sophisticated as it relates to the use of data. So the results here is ID&E initiative for you. And I say ID&E, inclusion, diversity, and equity, from the very first panel, and the reason why I'm referring to it as such, a few of the panels, if not all of them, started with the word inclusion. And I think that's something that was important that resonated with me. Hence the reason why I'm referring to it as ID&E. Yes, we have an active program. No, not yet. Looks like most of the folks here on the phone, 56%, don't have that, don't have an initiative, or they're probably in the beginning stages. So that's not surprising. There were a few on the panel, the past panels, that experienced some form of resistance or reluctance in formulating their strategy. So hopefully this conversation will help shed some light and some best practices that Nichelle will share with us. So Nichelle, let's jump into it, shall we?
Sure, let's go, Sal.
All right. Well, we've talked about this on a couple of different occasions when we've talked on the phone. We've undoubtedly all experienced a very challenging year that has forced organizations to face and address some really tough topics. Obviously, COVID-19 has impacted our economy and our general societal norms. On top of that, this summer resulted in some really unthinkable tragedies that have exposed social disparity and really catapulted the areas of inclusion, diversity, equity, and ultimately authentic leadership to the forefront. How have these past few months influenced or impacted how you've led ID&E?
Well, when I think back to probably around February of this year, the leaders, the employees, the volunteers that we have focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion in our strategy, we had gained such momentum, right? We were excited about where we were headed. We were gearing up for face-to-face interactions with employees, face-to-face conversations with customers and our suppliers. I mean, we were ready to go, right? Things were booked. We were good to travel around the country talking about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I, as a leader, was really trying to forge a new level of thinking around it, thinking differently about the impact to business. But then in one day, in March, right, boom, we were remote and in quarantine. And so we essentially had to stop. It felt like we were just on hold. And at first I was really disappointed because I was really looking forward to trying to execute this strategy that was definitely relying on face-to-face contact. So we had to adjust, right? We had to really kind of look at, what is the important piece here? And I realized that in DEI, essentially the I, inclusion, was key. And as a leader of Siemens, I really couldn't just give up. I had to forge ahead. And so since we now have been confronted with healthcare crisis, economic crisis, social crisis, as you mentioned, there's this widespread recognition of really trying to change that systematic racism and injustice. And from people from all walks of life really have just kind of come together and really enduring this change. And so while our strategy hasn't necessarily changed, it's definitely been accelerated. And we are in this new normal, and we have permanently actually shifted to more of a distributed model of managing our workforce. Most of our employees can work remote permanently 2 to 3 days a week, which really changes things across the board. So in the last 7-10 months or so, when I lead, my perspectives have changed. I have a deeper appreciation and understanding of people's experiences, the differences. We're focusing on what we're doing, how I'm doing it, and how we're doing it. And we're really trying to communicate more. Transparency is key. So people are getting on board with this wonderful journey that we're on. And even in the midst of these crises, we can still do good.
Do you feel like that the reaction, it was too reactionary, or do you feel like this catalyst, like you said, accelerated your efforts? Was there already momentum building towards all of this, or was this sort of this, I hate to say the wake-up call, but we've talked about it on the panel that you were on. How important was it for you to have ELT buy-in, if you will?
Yeah, well, I think that they were waking up, but slowly, right? And I think all three of the incidents that have happened between the healthcare, the economic, and the social, just kind of like, whoa, wait, really, what's going on here, right? And because of that, the positive out of that is like, yep, no, we got to do something, and we're going to keep going with this. And our goal as a collective is to not make just a moment, right? We want it to be a movement, and we want to embed it in everything we do, right? This is how we do business. And so I think that it's really enlightening to see that people really got on board and was able to really kind of say, okay, what are we going to do? And even today, I have emails just I got this week where people say, hey, guess what? We're doing this and we're doing that and we want to do that. And so people are continually to kind of grassroots already still think about the actions that they can take, which is comforting because that means that they haven't forgot about it. It wasn't just a summertime thing. It wasn't just a spring thing, right?
Sure. You say it's not a moment, it's a movement. It reminds me of what Tina Bagalki said, PepsiCo Frito-Lay at the very first panel. She said it's not a mind shift, but a heart shift. And I think that's kind of the general sense of what I think the consensus of companies and leaders like yourself are kind of tackling this topic.
Yeah. I was just going to say, yeah, my mantra is about it's like a heartbeat. You don't want it to stop, and you want it to be continuous and steady, right? So same kind of thing, right? We really want it to be embedded in, it's about human beings. It's not really political. It's not even about necessarily what industry you're in or any kind of race or any, it's really about being human and treating each other with respect.
The right thing to do, right? And I made the mistake, if you will, in my very first panel. I was hesitant to ask some of these questions because I thought of them as provocative. This topic in nature is provocative, if you will. But Randy Wilson at First United Bank said, hey, Sal, it's not provocative. It's a necessary conversation. And I think that's where we need to all get, is that comfort level of being able to talk about it, just like any other business topic, every aspect of the overarching business strategy. But obviously, this is something that we need to kind of be comfortable with, to be comfortable with uncomfortable, if you will.
Right.
As organizations come to the realization that they need to address this area, this question comes up often. Where does ultimate accountability lie as it relates to ensuring ideal culture and environment? Where does the buck stop?
Yeah. So we are all accountable. I mean, each of us plays a part in executing any D&I strategy, any type of thing that really allows us to make society better. We should all be in, right? We need that in order to change. The whole reason to even have a diversity, equity, inclusion culture or climate is to do better, is do business better so that, society is better. Our leadership team made it clear to our employees where we stand. We're unwavering in our support for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And reaching that ultimate accountability really comes down to addressing DE&I, aligning those goals with the business goals, built into our strategy. It's not diversity over here, business over here. You may have heard me say that before. It's how we do business. And then secondly, I would say we're not done when the low-hanging fruit is complete. Some people kind of say, well, we're done. Let's go do something different. No, it's the long-term impact of these initiatives that require sustainable accountability. Each initiative may have some immediate impact, but we have to keep going. We have to be consistent to get that long-term impact. Again, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think the third thing, Sal, is that ultimate accountability really shows up when you have ownership that leaves the business, the employees, the customers, and society, I would say, in a better place by actually doing the initiative, investing in the initiatives. And that's how you know you're doing the right things.
Sure. We talk about, we're talking about accountability, and obviously what's happened over the past year has kind of revolved around race. There's other elements of ID&E, and I think I know the answer to this, and I think we talked about this on our panel, but what have you seen within Siemens, and then also your peers who are in the same role, about the other elements of ID&E? Has that put them on the back burner, or has it put them to the forefront and even accelerated advancement in those different areas?
Yeah, I must say there was a concern in early summer about, oh man, this is just going to take over, and all the other things that we are going to do in ID&E are going to go by the wayside. But that didn't happen, at least from what I've seen and sharing with my colleagues, my other CDOs. They've been, in fact, incorporating the two together. You have things like unconscious bias, allyship. You have focusing on generations, focusing on different categories, such as the other affinity groups, et cetera. And so while we were still dealing with this racial injustice and racial justice, we still kept our other programs going. We still brought to light other things that were going on because they didn't stop and they needed the attention as well. And so the two have come together. But we have found that what I call the summer was like a hyper focus. We're bringing it down to more of a consistent focus across all of those particular initiatives.
Excellent.
I have a really, Sal, I have a good question that's submitted from the audience. It's a little bit of a sophisticated one, Nichelle. I think it's a fascinating. So I'll just kind of ask it and we can work through it. Basically, It says part of our challenge in rolling out these programs within our organization is misinformation. And we try to assure, this is assuming somebody who is leading an initiative, we try to assure our employees what our company was doing and really things that they should consider in their personal lives as well. But this is the quote: unfortunately, media and word of mouth compounded a lot of our challenges. How did you get through this? So I think it's a very provocative question, but a good one.
It is. Let me think about that for a minute. My initial reaction is yes. We did see that we couldn't keep up with the medias. Right. They were much faster than we were trying to tell whatever story they were telling, whatever, and so people were bringing that to work with them, right? I mean, everybody has their choice of channels that they watch on TV. Everybody has their own story, and even in their head or within their families and their networks. And it was really something that we just couldn't keep up with. And so what we decided to do is just stay the course on here's where we stand and be clear about it. Here's what we're going to do as an organization. Let's talk about what we can do in our realm of control and influence. And yes, you may be getting other stories, but here is the truth about where Siemens stands, what Siemens is going to do. And here's 2 or 3 things we want you to do as employees of Siemens, right? Yeah. And we just can't control what people are hearing in the rhetoric. And, it would be wrong to think that everybody in Siemens is on board, right? But my goal, right? One by one, I want people to understand the importance of it. You don't have to be BFFs with everybody, right? But what I want you to understand is the human side of this, and that everybody breathing has the opportunity and needs to be treated fairly. And so, I don't know if we're catching all the essences of that question, but yeah, it's really about sticking to what you can control. It's really about having a clear, concise message. I think it's also about who's telling the message. They can't just hear it from me. They can't just hear it from my CEO, who's very supportive. They've got to hear it from all levels of the organization. And in fact, that reminds me that several of the employees were like, well, what's my manager think? You know, my direct manager has to be able to tell me where they stand.
Right.
And if they're silent, that speaks more volumes than if they actually say something, right? Because now, you're not saying anything. So what does that mean, right? And then people start making their own story in their heads, right? And so we said, manager, you've got to have a conversation. You've got to talk to your employees about this. Now, whether you agree or not, that's a different kind of a different angle, but it's about really saying that, yes, let's champion this as an organization. As a leader within Siemens, here's where I stand with my team. I support you. You're in a safe space.
Excellent.
Thank you. This just dawned on me, Nichelle, just by virtue of what I said. You have over 295,000 global employees, 50,000 of them are in the U.S. Because this happens, we know what this is. How does that impact the other 295,000? Is there connection there? When I say connection, is there a disparate plan or approach, or how does that work when the majority of the issue, if you will, originated here? How did you guys manage it, or how are you managing it now?
Yeah, so what I think it itself evolved over the weeks. And so originally happened going on here in late May there, and then it was like Nichelle, Barbara Humpton, she's our CEO, what's going on? What are you guys doing? This is a U.S. thing, blah, blah, blah. But then, as you could see, things were popping up in terms of protests and different types of demonstrations across the world. I mean, it was just phenomenal to see the support and also the grassroots uplift of really trying to promote racial justice. And so what we did as an organization is we took the lead here in the U.S. and provided information back to the organization through podcasts, information, the right links, articles in our newspapers internally here, so that they were on the same page as we were on what we're doing. Again, back to that other question, right? We were being consistent across the overall Siemens, not just within the U.S. The worst thing that could happen is we say one thing and somebody else says a different thing, right? So it's important to be on that same page. And then going forward, what we decided to do is give regular updates on a global scale as to what we're doing. We have one coming up in January. And so that allows people to kind of understand, well, what actions did we take as an organization? What are we doing to continue this? Was this just for, June, July, and August, or is this forever, right? And then also addressing the same question about, well, what about everybody else, right? Everybody else still matters too. And so it's important that we have balance.
Yep. It just shows the complexity of this one topic and the nuances of having to manage that both domestically and internationally. Let's switch gears here real quickly on listening. And we all know, everyone here online here, there's a difference between hearing and listening. And my wife reminds me of this weekly, so I'm very familiar with the subject. Listening is the new required skill for executive leadership team members and managers. And the concept here is that if we're able to identify how an individual listens, leaders are then better equipped to formulate the right message and the means of delivering that said message. So how does the skill of listening in your perspective impact the way leaders manage an ideal culture and environment?
Well, I do agree that listening is something we need to do more of, right? If we take the time to listen to others, we can learn from them, right? We did a webinar series this past summer, fall, called Building a Courageous You. The foundational thought of it was that the collective of the individuals working within the organization make the organization stronger, more resilient, true change agents. And so we need to continue to focus on the individual, building up their courage to have a courageous conversation about race and other sensitive topics, taking action within their circle of influence, and how do they be authentic at work, right? And if you do that on an individual basis, one after one after one, when you bring them together, wow, together in a family, together in the neighborhood, together within the company on a team, you have a stronger, more impactful unit, right? And in order to do this, though, we did need to know more about them, right? Their background, which they came from. We needed to listen to understand. We needed to make that unfamiliar familiar, right? And so the building a courageous you series really required participants to listen to their coworkers and peers, and they explained why they built up courage or how they built up courage when they faced adversity, how they took action when they saw wrongdoing in the workplace, how they stay authentic to themselves when they may not fit the mold. It was very powerful impact on the participants. And I would also say, though, on a daily basis, we hear managers and supervisors giving orders, setting goals, keeping those widgets coming, right? And with these three crises, we also are experiencing this, this need for let's keep going, the business going. But as a responsibility as a leader and a manager, we need to make sure that we give a chance for the employee to really express their views and their personal impact of all the things that are culminating at one time within our country, within our world. And it gives the manager an opportunity to listen to their employees. I still say listening is something we need to do more of, Sal. And if we can take the time to listen, we can learn from them.
Yep. And I know Brett has a question to ask, but the point of the whole listening, and by the way, for the audience, if you are interested in a workshop regarding listening, I've got a fantastic partner that does that. Nichelle is very much aware. I made an introduction to Nichelle. And that is an up and coming topic that I think everyone should delve into. And the other point is that a lot of the panelists said that the listening part was critical because when all this started to happen, they had their town halls and these focus groups, and these ELT members were just dumbfounded, literally with their jaws on the floor, not realizing what their employees were experiencing. And so they heard, but they weren't really truly listening until that point. And so hence the reason why I think that this topic is pretty important. So Brett, I think you had a question or questions to ask.
Well, I was like we predicted, Nichelle, like the questions that are being submitted are unbelievable. Like these are so well thought out, which is good. I know that's kind of where we want to be. There's a lot of them around like including people and some of the initiatives. If you step below the executive rank, you kind of get down into the workers, which is, as you said, that's where the change is really going to happen. So, a question came in about ERGs. You mentioned ERGs, and the woman who submitted the question has an interesting comment that she felt like some people were moving away from them because they were ultimately having the negative impact. They were creating, either race or gender specific groups that were segregating from the rest, which wasn't necessarily intent. So how have you been able to kind of get through that or work through that, as it's been a good part of your strategy? Or maybe you've experienced it too, and maybe you've found a way around it.
Yeah, a couple of different thoughts on that. First of all, we have a diversity, equity, inclusion strategy overarching. So whoever, whether it's an ERG, whether it's a manager, whether it's a frontline worker, whether it's anybody within the organization, everybody is aligning with the strategy that aligns to the business goals. And so everything we do within an employee resource group aligns with that strategy. ERGs know the three pillars that we're working with, and they ask themselves, okay, the activities we want to do, the impact we want to make, does it align with those three pillar strategies? And that keeps people kind of in the lanes that they need to be in terms of making an impact. Because if you don't align it, then the ERGs kind of go off and do their own thing. They think they're doing a great thing, which they may be, but it doesn't feed the strategy, right? It doesn't help the organization where we want to focus. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing was that again, I think it's an evolution of the ERGs. You have your ERGs, they kind of work within their silos, right? The women's ERGs doing their thing, the Black ERGs doing their thing, and, veterans is doing their thing. And so what we're trying to do is now in this new age is do this cross-sectional inter-collaboration. And it brings them together and says, instead of having 3 seminars on the same topic, let's all work together. And this is brought to you by the Office of Diversity or the Diversity ERGs. And we decided that we weren't going to say the women are doing this and the Asians are doing this, and that just was being more divisive. We said, hey, we collectively as employee resource groups of Siemens are doing these particular initiatives and projects. And so what that does is bring down these walls of, well, that's that group over there and that's this group over here, and allows us to come together as collectively to say, hey, this is all for the purpose of increasing diversity, equity, inclusion. It's all for good. Everybody can join. Everybody can join in and benefit from it, especially when you start talking about, well, I'm not a woman, so why should I go to that webinar, right? I'm not Black, who should I do that? And we really have to start working on taking that down and doing it for the good of diversity, equity, inclusion. So it all comes back to that foundational strategy, regardless of ERG.
Love it. Great answer.
Great question. Brett, I'm looking at the questions too, and these are some meaty questions.
I know. I'm afraid to ask.
They're really, really good. And just to allay everyone's fears, the questions you're asking, we promise we'll get to them. When I say get to them, it may not be here live, but we'll take them down. And Nichelle has agreed that she'll answer all of these, so we'll get those back to everyone. But there's some really good ones here. Rachel Biddy, I see you. Michelle Bogan, a great question. Joe Rivas. Something that Michelle asked, which resonates with me because I have a podcast that we talked about this particular subject. And Nichelle, I don't remember we talked about code switching, and this whole dynamic that we're going through this summer with ID&E kind of brought up the term code switching. And if folks aren't familiar with the term, it is, for example, where, and I'll give you a perfect example, is where there articles have been written where Black women feel the need to straighten their hair or dress a certain way when they go to an interview because they feel that's the way that naturally what corporate America expects. And so that's code switching, is having to accommodate a perception. And so that's something that we talked about on our show. Have you seen that just amongst your, not necessarily even Siemens, but just in general amongst your peers? And what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's an unfortunate thing. I think it goes to that point of how can we be authentic wherever we are, right? And this summer, I think I've seen it more because, and it wasn't necessarily an appearance type of code switching, it was more of a mental health type of code switching. People have been impacted in various different ways because of what's happened this summer, and you can't just look at somebody and see if they're okay or not. And people were interacting in different groups and saying, yeah, I'm not okay, but I still have a smile on my face, and they were switching so that they didn't necessarily have to show their true feelings or perhaps their true mental state, whether they're at work or at home or what have you. And so that's scary because you don't know who you're talking to and what their true health is in terms of being able to deal with this. And it's not healthy for them to hold all that in and not be able to find an outlet. And so I think in general, these last 7 months have been extraordinary hard for people to be able to not code switch and still function right in their work. Now, in general, I would say code switching is something that's more norm than not, because people are trying to advance their careers, and they think they have to speak a different way or they have to do certain things a certain way to fit in with the crowd versus being authentic, right? And coming to work or being a part of a group or an organization, truly the way they are. I don't think it's something that it's just going to go away tomorrow, right? It's a societal thing from my viewpoint that we kind of put out there, another stigmatism that's going to be like, man, how do we get people to accept people as they are? But I've been seeing and I love it when I see, especially from the Black community, when people come to work with their hair natural and things like that, it's like, oh yes, that's cool, because it just shows their authentic selves. So it's really cool.
Yeah.
Agreed. Brett, I think has some good questions, and thank you for adding some color to that. I've experienced code switching a little bit, not quite as bad as most, but I know what that means, and that's an important thing to be mindful of. Brett, you have some questions here, some really good ones.
Yeah, I was trying to take, Nichelle, a whole bunch of really good questions and wrap them in a common theme. And I think there's one really good theme, and that is, you talked about it before. You started in this 10 years ago, right? And I kind of made the analogy, you probably felt like you were pushing a rock uphill. And I don't know if you think that the rock is getting ready to go over the hill, but, to me, HR issues and employee issues have been for 30 years or more, ever since I've been in HR. I think the ultimate question is do you think you're getting to a point right now where you're past awareness and now you're starting to get to measurement, accountability, and starting to get really down to that side of things as opposed to it's just a purely educational mode? Where do you feel like you're at, and have you had any, I hate to say incidents, both negative and positive, where you recognize people, or maybe you had to do performance management around people that weren't getting it? Do you feel like that's where we're at and that's where we're heading? And what has been your experience in that regard?
Well, yeah, it's definitely been a maturity curve, right? You kind of start off just with purely compliance. We're just doing this so we don't get in trouble with, the government, the rules of the law and all that good stuff. And then you move into this awareness of, what's going on here? How do we get people involved, and on and on. And so I think we definitely, at least within Siemens, are moving into that point of it's going deeper into the root of what we do, right? We are getting better at applying it across the board, thinking about it before we act. We are really kind of at all corners. I like to get DEI in all corners of Siemens and really think about how are we spending our money, who are we hiring, how do we develop, even those that may leave Siemens, why did they leave, and what can we do differently to increase our retention? And so D&I goes across every aspect of a business, of an organization. It's not just an HR thing. In fact, I don't even like to, there's a piece of HR in there, but it's bigger than HR. It is about the business overall, the holistic piece. And as you mature over time, because you can stay with it, you see yourself evolving. Now, we're not blind that there are pieces of the organization that may need a little bit, that may be at a different part of the maturity curve than collectively as a whole, but you have to meet people where they're at. And so what we've done is really kind of work with each business owner, with each manager, trying to get them to understand the dynamics of all the DEI elements so that they're able to take the corrective or proper actions to make the business better. Again, taking each of those businesses and you put them together, Siemens holistically becomes better. And so, I think that we are at that cusp of the next level of DEI for Siemens. I see it in other organizations. There's other organizations that are beyond us that I look to for, how did they do that? Learning best practices. It's a wonder to have a CDO network that allows us to be able to share best practices, tackle, topics that we need to tackle collectively and learn from each other, because you just can't do it in a vacuum. You can't do it by yourself, and you have to take a look at it. So.
Yeah, and I think some of the other questions are really good. And you summed it up perfectly. There's a difference between doing something because you want to be in compliance, right? Which which often is the catalyst. But ultimately, where you're trying to get to, whereas it's not a big deal. It's just the way we do our business, the way we operate, or some of these things. There's a really good question, and I know a couple of it's come up in a lot of areas where hiring initiatives. This quote, I'll read it. It says, "What are your thoughts on corporations making pledges? Wells Fargo pledged to double its rank of Black managers, and the OFCCP said, hey, hang on, like you're now starting to go in the other direction." Or I saw Best Buy yesterday or 2 days ago had a big pledge to $44 million to invest in 1 out of 3 people will be African American or diversity. What are your thoughts on that, on how impactful that is, good, bad, or different? Or is it just the way it's going to be?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful. I think we can't toe the line so close that we're breaking the law and we start getting into that realm of quotas and things like that. We just can't do that. At the same time, we do need some kind of measurement of what we're doing is impactful. So if it is, keep going. If it's not, then we need to do something different. So there's some measure of metrics and elements in that. But I really think that for the collective of the individuals and the managers, focusing them on the actions they're taking, you'll get the metrics from it, right? And so it's really, because I could have the best strategy, I could have the best KPIs I'm going to put out there, right? Key performance indicators out there. But if I don't have the right mindset of the hiring managers, the right mindset of individuals, the right mindset of individual contributors, right? That's all for naught, because they're not on board, not thinking the right way, they're not behaving the right way, they're not interacting or collaborating, they're not inclusive, right? They're not being fair in their groups. And so all of that really adds up to meeting those KPIs. So I got to focus on that. And so it's also important to focus on that so it's not a check the box, right? Sometimes when you put numbers out there, people are like, oh, I'm at 20, now I'm 21, now I'm 22, check, okay, I'm done. And that's not the behavior you want, right? You want it to be kind of a natural DNA type of thing, and it'll come. You exercise, you lose weight, you eat right? Right? The skill will show your works of your efforts. So same thing with this, right? Your efforts and the initiatives and the right initiatives, getting people involved at all levels of the organization, will show that. So.
Yeah,
hopefully that response, hopefully Karen McCombs, you had a really good question. Hopefully that addressed it, where she was saying, how do we get past this reaction of not doing this, where they're just hiring people of color or LGBTQ and they're not really qualified, but just to fill that, fill the numbers, like you said, check a box and,
Yeah. Well, I think there's a little bit more to that, Sal, because that's not only about just to check the box, but it's also about, which I guess I said, which is the mindset, right? If somebody's just doing it just to kind of say, oh, look, see, I hired 3 African Americans. They're not qualified, but I hired them. That's not do it. We still need to do it within our proper procedures and processes, but we need to review them so that we're inclusive. We need to work with our talent acquisition team so that they can source from all different sources, not just the same 10 list of sources that we've always been using for the last 5 or 6 years, right? We need to open our minds to other ways of getting talent to the organization, attracting them to the organization. Stop there. Once you're in the organization, how do you develop people? People want to go where they feel like they're being heard, they're valued, and they want to see themselves move their careers, right? And even if I never change jobs and this is the job I love to do, I still want to be nourished within my job, right? And so it's important.
This theme of compliance, Brett actually sent me the article, and I was wondering, have you heard that NASDAQ is seeking mandatory board diversity for listed companies? And what are your thoughts on that? It's kind of going along the same theme here.
Yeah, I read that article, and interesting, I thought. Interesting. My initial reaction is, okay, so if we do this and require it, maybe it'll move the needle faster versus us each individually trying to do it on our own time and our own pace and our own way, right? People want to be on the NASDAQ, and in order to do that, they'll have to comply. I think that I hope they give time, because we just don't want to just do it again just to be doing it. We want to do it with the right quality and the right impact, and so that we don't mess up something trying to do something good, right? So more to come on that.
Right.
We'll see what happens.
It'll be interesting how that's enforced. Right. Start now. And, what time frames are they envisioning? What's the end game? I think the end game is if you don't follow suit, that you could be delisted. I think that's a safe assumption of where they're going with that. But trying to be mindful of times. There are a lot of good questions here. So one of them here, and kind of going back to the very beginning, what you created there at Siemens, what was already there. For someone who is beginning their ID&E strategy, what are some of the pitfalls and maybe some tips of things that how to prioritize the things that you need to make sure that you have first, sort of the foundation, and what are the pitfalls that go along with that?
Well, let me think. I think one of the things that you have to look at is upfront. You have to realize that people are varying levels don't quite understand it all, right? So there's varying levels of understanding. Why are we even talking about this? To, hey, I'm all on board, let's go, right? And so I would call it their readiness, the readiness to help. And if you can get your mind around that not everybody's going to be ready to help, but those that are, how do you leverage them? Then you're able to move the organization forward inch by inch. And if you have that strategy and data, you can see where to focus first, right? So I always say, don't try to do it all, right? Like I said, we started with one hrQ and it evolved from there. But you can't just boil the ocean, and you can't just start with everything in place. And you shouldn't wait till everything's in place to get started. So it's kind of a catch-22 there, Sal, with it being, where do I start? And then, there's so much I want to get done. So what's a nice low-hanging fruit where you can show a proof point that, see, this works, this makes an impact on the organization in a positive way. Let's get that done. Okay, we did one thing. Now let's add to it. Because you don't want to stop doing what you're doing. You just want to continually add to it. And eventually what you do is you build this network of people. Most of the network that's working within Siemens is a voluntary network, right? They have jobs that they do on a day-to-day basis, but they're passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion. And so they want to do their job and diversity, equity, inclusion, and influence either within their teams, within their groups, within the organization nationwide. And that's exciting. And so you have to be able to give them structure, something to do, make it impactful, right? And so there's things we put in place in terms of procedures and policies that allow people to be impactful, but yet do it within compliance, right? Let's see, what else did you ask me about a resistance? I think that you're going to find yourself constantly justifying the benefit of diversity, equity, inclusion. I would love to see the day when I don't have to say why it's important for the business. But until then, I will keep explaining it, keep giving examples, keep being a champion of diversity is a business imperative. It's not a nice to have, it's a have to have. And we're seeing it all over, working with customers, suppliers, employees, new students coming out of school. It doesn't matter. They're all asking, what are you guys doing around race? What are you doing around diversity? How am I feeling included? What do you have in place here, there? And at some point, we'll have to realize that, we have to do this regardless. It's kind of like, we have to have finance, we have to have accounting, we have to have diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So it's no longer an initiative, but it's just an overarching part of the business.
Exactly.
That's where we want to get to.
I think a good analogy would be, you're successful when you don't have a job, Nichelle. When they're like, we don't need one because we're already good.
You're right.
So speaking of that, you talked a little bit about it before, about, and a few people have talked about getting individual employees on board. And look, the nobody's naive to believe, especially of an organization of your size, that you're going to get 100% participation, right? Because even if you want to, somebody made the comment, diversity also is a diversity of ideas. It's not just a diversity of demographics. So how do you deal with, and I've seen this in other companies, how do you deal with an employee or a manager, maybe who outside of work is saying things that you might find inconsistent with what the policy is? How far are you policy-wise reaching in that area? And have you had any successes or conflicts or terminations or anything in that area? How's that working? How's that come about?
I think that the way we've built our policies and procedures, if what the person's doing in their personal life crosses over into the workplace life, we follow those processes and procedures to take the right corrective action.
Yeah.
We've seen very little, thank God.
Yeah.
And I think that bodes to the culture of Siemens, right? And being able to really understand where we're headed with this. I think, though, that it's important that people realize that even especially in these day and age where we're melding our workplace, right, with our home place is all one now, with this remote work, that you're going to run into more and more of these personal views and then melting with the workplace. And so we have to be kind of cognizant that, how is this impacting everybody from a behavioral perspective? Again, I go back to the point that you can't just go, hey, we had a team meeting and everybody's on the same page. No, people have been impacted individually differently. I may be home as a teaching my kids 4th grade, right, and trying to work. Somebody else may have elderly parents with them. Somebody else may be single and what have you. And so there might be all these different circumstances. So it's important to have a conversation with your employees one-on-one and understand what their situation is, what they can do to stay productive and engaged, and just really understand them for what they have as their situation in this time that we're in, what we call the new normal.
Yeah, I tell you, that's probably what you just said is, to me, is seems like a key to unlock, is that the understanding that people immediately think diversity, they immediately think it's a demographic issue. And if you really think about it, it is, like you said, diversity of, hey, I'm a working parent, I'm a single parent with young children. Like, that's a diverse situation than somebody who's in a different position. Like, I don't think we've matured that way yet. But to your point, I think that really is a more inclusive way, because now I feel like, okay, even though, I'm a 52-year-old white male, like I still have a unique set of circumstances in my life. I might have a sick family member. I might have, whatever, kids at home. I might be whatever. I also have a unique life circumstance that we all want to think about. That it feels to me like you said that. It just feels like a very, quote, inclusive mindset. It just goes beyond something that is, it's just so demographic.
Yeah, and let me just kind of expound on that. I have this iceberg that I show when I try to say from just some foundational information. Let's all get on the same page what diversity is. At the top of the iceberg, it's the gender, it's the race, all those things you can see, right? You can see the color of my skin, my hair color, all that good stuff, right? And but there's so much underneath that iceberg that you can't see. You can't look at me and know my education. You can't know my experience. And so let's take and leverage all of those things about who people are as a collective person and bring those up and be transparent about them so that we can leverage them in business and what we're trying to do. We can be more innovative. That's where the diversity of thought comes in. And when you build teams within your organization, don't pick the same people every time, because otherwise you get the same input. Let's diversify that. Let's give people a chance. I always like to say, somebody gave you a chance to be successful. Let's reach out and bring others forward so that they can be successful too. There's lots of great ideas out there. and people bring lots of experience to the table. And that diversity of lots of different attributes, we need to leverage them more than just looking at it and say, oh, it's a woman, right? Yeah. And even me as a woman, that doesn't mean I don't have other cross intersectionalities with all the other diverse attributes.
Yeah, I love that. That's phenomenal.
Well, listen, we are right at almost 2:00 Central. This has been an absolute honor. I knew that we would run out of time. For those that we didn't get to the questions, we promise that we'll get them to Nichelle. We'll address them and send them out to you. It's been an absolute honor to have you. What's the best way to get in touch with you folks? With you, how do the folks out there get in touch with you, Nichelle?
Yeah, check me out on LinkedIn. That's probably the best one. I'm also on Twitter, so either one. And they can just send me a note, and we can chat there and connect that way.
Perfect. Well, on behalf of hrQ, Landrum HR, obviously the audience, we appreciate you spending the afternoon with us. For the attendees, please take a moment when you exit the webinar to answer the quick survey. This helps us a great deal because it helps us with identifying what content you might be interested in as well as the format. I do have a capstone webinar. I keep referring to these ideal roundtables. In January, I'll have some, if not all, of the panelists back on a webinar in late January. Well, we'll have a confab and talk about the executive summary that I referred to earlier. Also, my next virtual fireside chat is scheduled for February, so keep your eyes out on the details for that. So happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Holidays to you and yours. Until next time, I'm Sal Vergara with hrQ, with Brett Kierstead. Until next time, elevate yourself and those around you.
Thanks, Nichelle.
Thank you.